Hey, what's up, guys? I'm not going to waste any time today. We're going to jump straight into this one, talking about Spider-Man Far From Home. If you've seen the trailers, if you've seen any MCU film in the last, 2 years, you know what's going on going into this film. You have an idea. I'm going to try not to talk about that so much. Basically, Peter and his friends are going on a trip overseas to hang out. This is vacation time. Naturally, it doesn't go how Peter wants. Nick Fury gets in the mix, and you know that usually means that there's some sort of action that's going to take place. You meet a guy named Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, who we know is in the mix of all this stuff. Meanwhile, Pete's trying to, capitalize on the time he's got with MJ coming up on this trip to tell her how much he likes her and see what happens from there. Naturally, being Spider-Man doesn't allow for a lot of space to have conversations like that with people like MJ. So Pete's got work to do. And apparently so do we as audience members in this film. So if you don't know anything about the Spider-Man comic books, so you know a little bit about that kind of stuff, this film has a lot to do with misdirection and illusion. And it's not surprising if you're dealing with a character like Mysterio in the mix. Those people who understand the Spider-Man lore know all there is to know. They know enough about Mysterio to know that that's accurate. So, what are we talking about in this film? What's good? The good action was great. As is to be expected in a Spider-Man film, that's what you're getting. You're going to get some acrobatics, you're going to get some interesting fight choreography things, and you might get some things that you didn't expect. With the character like Mysterio, there's all kinds of illusionary type stuff, and a lot of things throw you off. It's a little bit disorienting, as an audience member. They've taken a lot of the stuff that you see in the comic books with Mysterio and brought that to life in a way that is pretty exciting, actually. So that's cool. All of that is cool. The spectacle of it is fun. But on the more human page of it, the dynamic between Mary Jane and Peter is delightfully awkward. It feels real. They're like two real teenagers who are awkward around each other. And Zendaya particularly she's plays a really good awkward nerdy teenager. Tom Holland, we know he has that down, so that stuff it's good. But to see Zendaya in that way, you don't see her too much in Homecoming. So to see her in this way in Far From Home, it's refreshing. It's very nice to see. That was really cool. That dynamic of it. And I think that's part of what makes this film work. Outside of the cool Spider-Man stuff, which you're going to get, which is the case with any Spider-Man film, or any action film really. But I think particularly with Spider-Man, a lot of what makes him work is not so much the action stuff. It's the stuff behind the mask, the Peter Parker dilemma stuff that he's dealing with while trying to be Spider-Man, trying to live up to his responsibilities as Spider-Man. And this film is no exception in how it handles that. In a lot of ways, it's not anything new than what we've seen in other Spider-Man films. I think it comes closer to what was going on in the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi films, particularly with Spider-Man 1 and 2. 3 is in there too, but really 1 and 2, because the theme of responsibility and him and his own needs and wants is more palpable there, particularly in Spider-Man 2. And so I think if you look at those two films, Spider-Man 2 and Far From Home, some of the same threads are touched on. And it's cool the different ways that this film deals with some of those same themes. So that's cool. What else is cool? Acting. So top of the list, obviously, Jake Gyllenhaal. Jake Gyllenhaal is a master in this film. I think it's cool, first of all, that he's in a Spider-Man film, particularly because there were conversations, if you remember back in 2004, where Tobey Maguire had hurt his back, and there was a question of whether or not he was going to return in the role of Spider-Man. And Jake Gyllenhaal was the next person in line to possibly take over the role. So he didn't do that, thankfully. I'm glad that Tobey Maguire stayed in the role. But it's cool to see that come full circle in a different way, where he's in a Spider-Man film as a Spider-Man character. And if you don't know about Mysterio, I'm not going to spoil anything here about him as a character. you can Google that and find that out. But those who are in the know, or in the web, as it were, you know what time it is with Mysterio, and Jake Gyllenhaal really brings it. He's really charming. He really comes with it, and he's probably at the top of the list as far as acting in this film. Next to Tom Holland, he's almost like you almost don't need to mention him because he's whatever. We know he's going to come correct what's going on, and he definitely does that. I appreciated the moments of emotion that comes from him, even some of the more understated elements of emotion when things come to a head for him, particularly at the end and middle and the end of the film. It's really cool to see him. He's spreading those wings and doing stuff that you would expect from Peter at that time, at this particular point in time in his life, where he's wrestling with all he wants to do is just hang out with his friends and tell the girl he likes her, but you got villains and stuff doing stuff, and you have the ability to stop it. You have to stop it. It sucks, but that's what it is to be Spider-Man. What else is good about the film? Cinematography is ridiculous in this film, particularly in some of the action sequences when Spider-Man is getting to do some acrobatics and really cool stuff. The camera puts you into the action. You see him, it follows him as he's flipping and doing things. That's really cool. You don't see that too often in Spider-Man films. You can go back through any of the Spider-Man films and you don't see it done in the way that it was done in this film. And that was really neat to see. And with the web syncing sequences, you don't see that a lot in this movie anyway. Really at the end where he's getting to do that, and the camera places you in that. I think it's done better a little bit than the Amazing Spider-Man, the Andrew Garfield's first film. Really cool. The first person view was cool. It was interesting. It was new. You hadn't seen that in Spider-Man film before. But I almost prefer the Far From Home better, where you see him swinging and the camera is connected to, like it's on his back almost. You can see right behind him, and then the recoil is captured when you grab a web, and it feels very visceral. You feel almost the wind as hitting you as you're swinging through the canyons and crevices of Manhattan. So that is pretty awesome. Some of the questionable things about the film, I would say, for one, this is a minor thing, I think, really probably, but it's something that bothered me as a Spider-Man fan, lifelong, since I was a kid. The notion of the spider sense and how that is not, it's mentioned in the film. Why is it not? It doesn't work. We're never given an explanation as to why that is, but characters reference it, and I think they have a silly nickname for it, which is ridiculous. It almost doesn't need to be mentioned. That's silly. So anyway, I would have preferred, if you're not going to have spider sense in the film and you're going to mention it, then it should be at least touched on why that is. Was he stressed? Did he get injured in the battle at Endgame, and that's why his stuff got jacked? There's no reference to why that might be. Whatever, that's whack. Side piece. The other thing is the notion of the blip, which is the blip is basically, the film describes it as the event that took away some students after Thanos did the snap in Infinity War, and then brings the ones that were snapped away back, the kids who return 5 years later. I feel like that almost didn't need to be explained. I suppose people have questions about, why when people come back, some people are 5 years older than those who were snapped away. The people who return, they return the same age they were when they were snapped away 5 years prior, and those who survived the snap aged those 5 years. Whatever. It's explained weirdly in the film, and that either could have been explained more clearly, or it could have been omitted from the film, all the way. Didn't need that. What else? The other thing was Tony Stark. Okay. Obviously, Robert Downey Jr. and Tony Stark have become synonymous in the MCU. Tony Stark's presence is felt pretty much throughout the MCU in the film, all these films, particularly on Earth. The presence of, if it's not Tony, then it's Dad Howard. Some Stark is touched on in some of the Earthbound stories. I had a problem. I haven't done I've talked about this before and written about this in other forums for Homecoming, and how I had an issue with Tony Stark being in Homecoming at all, because it felt like it took away from the journey that Peter was supposed to be on. I mean, it does and it doesn't. It's still Peter's story, but the fact that Iron Man's at that point, he's too big a character to be in anyone else's film, because that automatically takes some shine away from whoever the character you're supposed to be focusing on is. In my opinion, that's what I think. And now we know, if you've seen Endgame, you know what happens to Tony. He's not around anymore, but his presence is felt pretty heavily in this film, Far From Home. And I don't know how I felt about that. That bothered me. Obviously, you know, if you know anything about the recent comics in the last, 5 years, 6 years or so, where, or, you know, anywhere from Civil War onwards, the last maybe 7 years or so, probably, where Tony and Peter become particularly close. Tony makes Peter the Iron Spider suit, and Peter becomes a pivotal character in the Civil War series. That's not the case in the films, but obviously the films they reference a lot of the comic book stuff, which I think there's something interesting about how when they make these films, there's a precedent for everything that happens, even if it happens in a weird way. Things are reshuffled and remixed from the comics in the films to make it fit whatever the filmic situation of that is. So having Peter and Tony close in the comics, naturally, those two characters interacting with each other in the films, you want to, as filmmakers, they're going to find a way to have that happen in the films too. So Peter, at one point in the comics, becomes like a Tony Stark figure. He's like, instead of Stark Industries, you have Parker Industries. There's a version of that where he's rich, he's got suits and ties and stuff like that. And I feel like those things take away from the core of what Spider-Man's supposed to be. I'm going to pause there and relate it back to Far From Home. Far From Home, there's a thread in the film where Tony essentially leaves Peter Edith, the glasses, these high-tech glasses, for whoever's going to be the next Tony Stark. And obviously, my read of the next Tony Stark was what it is in the comic books, where the next Tony Stark is essentially Peter wearing nice suits and having a lot of money and doing stuff that Tony Stark did, inventing things, using his brain to do a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know. Again, I don't know if that works as well. Naturally, here in Far From Home, it's referenced. That thread is referenced, and Peter having the notion, dealing with the notion of stepping into Tony Stark's shoes, as a 16-year-old kid, rightfully is he's not sure about that, and I'm not sure about that. Yet there are references to the first Iron Man and how Peter moves in terms of the start of the last act of the film, making his own costume. There's musical cues that reference the first Iron Man. He's literally all up. Tony Stark is all up in this film, from wall images to documentary things, tributes in the film. All of these things, which is cool to acknowledge those who are not in the stories beyond Endgame, but particularly for Tony, because he's such a major player. Again, having that inform Spider-Man stuff, while it's cool, I guess, but I don't know that it's necessary. I don't know. I didn't think it was necessary. That's all I'm going to say there. I'm going to leave it there, and that's that. The other thing that was whack, again, it's another small thing, is the Aunt May and Happy Hogan dynamic. All right, I guess it's cool to have some other things going on, other relationships and stuff happening outside of whatever was happening in Peter's world, but ultimately it wasn't necessary. It's fun, it's played for laughs, and I think it's a nice comic relief, but not necessary, whatever. Especially if you're going to not follow through with whatever it is. Are people going to be together, or they're not going to be together? Same thing with Ned and Betty. In fact, actually, I'm actually more forgiving of Ned and Betty's situation. I just feel like it was referenced almost too much in the film. All the lovey-dovey stuff was almost a little bit, it was too heavy-handed a little bit. So I was like, okay, it got to a point where it wasn't funny anymore. It was funny the first few times, and after a while I was like, it wasn't really that funny. It's getting to be annoying now. So you have that. But something else I thought was interesting was I would have liked to see even a brief conversation between Peter and Aunt May about why Peter is Spider-Man. Remember at the end of Homecoming, Aunt May discovers that Peter is Spider-Man. And my expectation in a follow-up film was that they would be having a conversation about that. There was no reference of that, how he was hiding being Spider-Man. There was no conversation about that, and I think I wanted that. It doesn't make or break the film that it's not in there, but it would be nice that I would have appreciated that, just so they could have like some one-on-one time to actually discuss Peter's motivations and why he's doing what he's doing. Anyway, that's where I am on that. All in all, movie was solid follow-up to Homecoming. I think still Homecoming is better. This film, Far From Home, I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. That's my rating. That's where I'm at. That's what I think. You can tell me what you think. Look out for the written review on the C4C blog when you get a chance. And that'll be all. I think that's all for me. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I appreciate you listening, and feel free to comment. I appreciate your thoughts and comments. And if not, I appreciate just the time. So thank you.